Hi, Penny Lane here with Penny Lane View and jobcosting.com. In this video, I'm going to go through the integration settings between QuickBooks Online and JobTread. Let's get started. From the side menu, click Settings, and then from the upper menu, click Integrations and then QuickBooks Online. In this example, I'm already connected to QuickBooks, but if I wasn't, there would just be a link for me to click here to initiate that integration. It'll take me through a little wizard, and once I'm connected, then I will see this screen where we can then revise our integration settings. Let's talk first about the collapsed integration settings up here. The first one is set up and sync your tax agency in QuickBooks. And this is for those of you that charge sales tax to your customers on your customer invoices. So if you charge sales tax to your customer, this is simply prompting you to set up your sales tax system in QuickBooks Online. Because if you do not have your sales tax system set up in QuickBooks Online, even if you charge sales tax to your customer on an invoice in JobTread, it won't have any way to show up in QuickBooks Online. I won't go to it any further than that because, of course, sales tax varies quite a bit from business to business and state to state. Next, we're going to see this option, set up and sync your payment accounts. This is where I will set up the accounts that I want to hit in QuickBooks when I mark transactions paid in JobTread. For example, the deposit to account is the account that I want JobTread to deposit the transaction for any invoices that I mark paid. So if I mark an invoice paid in JobTread, I want it to show up in either my undeposited funds account or maybe my bank account. If I choose my bank account, then that deposit is just going to drop right into this bank account register. If I choose undeposited funds, it will route to the undeposited funds account or the payments to deposit account in QuickBooks Online, where I can then group it together with other payments and deposit it into my bank account in one amount. The withdraw from account is the account that is hit when I mark a bill paid in JobTread. And be very careful with this because in JobTread, you aren't going to be able to group together multiple bills into one transaction payment. So if you need to do that, I would recommend that you record your bill payments over in QuickBooks Online if you need to group them together. Basically, if I mark a bill paid in JobTread, it's going to land directly into this checking account. Hot tip, if I need to fix something in JobTread, such as the way a bill payment or customer payment was applied, I can actually remove these and then I can manipulate the payment transactions in JobTread without creating any duplicates or impacting the QuickBooks Online side. This option here, payment processing deposit to for the online processors and fees, this is for you if you use the merchant services in JobTread. So if your customers pay you electronically through Evo or Stripe or the merchant service that you're using in JobTread, this is where the deposit is going to land. And some people might choose a clearing account if they want to work with, if they have a large volume of transaction and they need to do something about the fees. But generally, this is just the bank account where your merchant account is mapped to, where your payment is going to show up and get deposited to. And then the processing fee, this is just for the processing fees that are associated so that those will land in QuickBooks correctly. So this should be something like an expense account, like bank charges or merchant service fees. Our next hidden setting is import and map JobTread cost codes to QuickBooks, and I'm going to come back around to that one in a minute. Let's talk about these document settings. So in our document settings, push customer invoices is just what it sounds like. Any invoices that are created in JobTread, so these are customer invoices, will sync over to QuickBooks Online. And the Pay Now button is a really cool feature that allows you to use your QuickBooks Payments merchant account over in QuickBooks Online. This will put a Pay Now button on the JobTread invoice that you send to your customer, and then when your customer clicks on it, they will actually be rerouted to the QuickBooks invoice that will process using your merchant account there. Just be very careful with this because a lot of people are surprised to find out that the invoice in QuickBooks is in cost code line item detail, and you can customize your templates and things to make that not show up. But before you go live with a customer, make sure you test this out so that your customer is only seeing what you want them to see and that they don't see anything in QuickBooks that you that you don't want them to see. Push vendor bills, exactly what it sounds like. Any bills that I create in JobTread will sync over to QuickBooks Online. Sync credits, very important that this is activated. This will sync credits between QuickBooks Online and JobTread. And pull expenses actually allows you to pull expenses into JobTread from QuickBooks Online. And I do recommend you put a default vendor here because oftentimes people will forget to put a vendor on the transaction, especially if they're processing it through the QuickBooks transaction bank feeds. I shouldn't say oftentimes, but on occasion. And this way, the transaction will still show up in JobTread, whereas if there is no default vendor, it just won't show up here at all. So I recommend putting a default vendor here. The job to customer project mapping, JobTread offers us quite a few options here. We can either manually map our jobs to a customer or project. We can create a two-tier customer project situation over in QuickBooks where JobTread will create a customer and then the job is a sub-customer. We can have the location as a sub-customer, so we can have JobTread set up a customer, the location as a sub-customer, the job as a sub-customer of that. If you use the projects feature in QuickBooks Online, you can have JobTread automatically create your customer and your project and create your customer project with a location in between. I'll go over these in a little bit more detail in another video, but it's awesome that we have all of these different options for syncing our customers and jobs. Sync files, this is a great feature. If you have sync files turned on, then any attachments of documents to JobTread or QuickBooks Online transactions will sync both ways. You can also set up a default filter and a default file tag for these particular attachments and documents. Use classes, JobTread supports the use of class tracking. So if you use class tracking in QuickBooks Online, you could activate this feature, and class tracking in JobTread is at the job level. So in JobTread, you can assign a class to that job, and then any transactions entered in JobTread, customer invoices, bills, expenses, and even time entries will sync over to QuickBooks with the class assigned to that transaction. And the error email recipients, you'll put email addresses here for those that you want to get notified if there is a sync error between JobTread and QuickBooks Online. Let's talk now about import and map JobTread cost codes to QuickBooks. I'm going to get into this more in a separate video, but here we can add a default invoice item and a default bill item. These default items just help prevent sync errors. If there's any kind of item sync, at least the transaction is still going to show up. It may not be at the correct cost code, but you won't have a total failure. The cost plus fees item is where you would put in if you wanted to allocate the markup on your cost plus invoices in JobTread to a specific product or service in QuickBooks, which might assign it to a specific income account in QuickBooks. So if in QuickBooks you want to see your markup on a separate line item, that's what this allows you to do. You can also download your JobTread cost codes to a CSV right here, and that will enable you to then map and import those cost codes into QuickBooks Online. When it comes to your products and services mapping, this is where that happens, and I'm going to talk a lot more about this in another video. But the long and the short of it is, it's extremely important that every single cost code in JobTread is mapped back to a product or service in QuickBooks Online. Otherwise, you will have a sync failure. So for example, see this item here? It's where it says default. That means it is not mapped back to a product or service in QuickBooks Online, meaning any transactions assigned to that cost code will show up in this default item, which may or may not be correct and probably isn't going to be right, and then you'll have some undesirable effects on the JobTread side. Let's talk about employee mapping. If you want your timesheets that are entered or your time entries that are in JobTread to sync over to the QuickBooks Online timesheets, then you just want to map your JobTread member back to your QuickBooks employee. Unsynced records, just what it sounds like. This is where you can see any records that did not sync from JobTread to QuickBooks Online. And you can search by documents, applied payments, time entries, or vendors. And within that, you can choose to see only transactions after a certain date. Sometimes we might have some transactions in here that we know are from an old date, maybe when we're doing our setup that we don't want to be reminded of, and so you can filter this out to only a certain date range. And you can also use the search query. This would be used in the case of, for example, you're over in QuickBooks and you're like, why is that transaction not showing up here? You can come back into this area and you can click on the transaction and push selected. And if there isn't a problem now and it's all good, it'll sync over, or it will show you an error message that will allow you to troubleshoot the sync error on that transaction. And finally, we have our QBO records. These are all of the records that have come over from QuickBooks Online, and you can filter this by QuickBooks creation date, by the transaction date, or the transaction type, and you can also sort it by either the transaction or the creation date, ascending or descending. That's it for our integration settings in JobTread to QuickBooks Online. If you have any questions, please reach out to support@jobtread.com.